Assalamualaikum. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is my last session with you all at MSA West, and again, it's an honor to be here. I have a very short amount of time and a lot of material to cover, and I'm not usually good at doing that, so bear with me if I'm speaking a little bit fast. I wanted us to think about some more of American history that we draw the legacy of MSA West from. As a matter of fact, the original founding vision of MSA West was to draw from both the American civil rights movement and the global Islamic movements around the world. This was in the original founding documents. I got involved with MSA West in the year 2000, 2 years after Brother Ali. And when I first got involved, there were things that I thought were, initially, it put me off as being just different, and I didn't understand it. So I went to local religious leaders to ask them about it. And to be honest, they didn't give me good advice. I went to them and I said, there's this new organization called MSA West, and they want to, be about unity and about bridging the different gaps between the Muslim community and work together. And unfortunately, the religious leader that I had gone to said something along the lines of, they include the Shia with a chuckle, as if that's something that means you shouldn't get involved with them. Somehow they're deviant. And I still went to the delegates meeting. I didn't, at the time when I heard it, I knew it's wrong, right? When you hear something like that, internally, that's not the way a Muslim is supposed to respond. So I still went to the delegates meeting, and when I attended, I found a beautiful example of what that vision of MSA West was. People who came from very different backgrounds. Yes, there were Shia and Sunni in the same room. There were young people who belonged to the different Muslim organizations, whether it be MAS or ICNA or ISNA or Sabiqun or whatnot that existed back then. And they were in one room talking together about working for Islam in America and working for social causes in America, not just Muslim issues. So this is something that was inspiring to me, and I began to listen to what they had to offer and realized that I needed to think critically about what I was being told in my own community. And so I give this advice again to all of you, is to think very critically about the messages you may receive here and there and go back to what are the values, the universal values of Islam. If it feels wrong, a lot of times it is. If you're hearing a message of discrimination, of hate towards your fellow Muslim brother, of deviancy, of the kind of takfir, this person may not even be Muslim. All of that stuff is a signal that you're not getting good advice. And when you get involved with MSA West, you get to experience the beauty of something else, the beauty that diversity and unity can bring. So thinking about the two legacies that MSA West was meant to draw on, and thinking about the civil rights movement, I want to ask this audience by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee? Oh, that's very bad. Snick, how many of you are familiar with the Black Panthers? Okay, alhamdulillah, that's better. Nation of Islam. Okay, better. And there's, many other civil rights organizations that we should be familiar with. If the founding vision is to be inspired by these legacies, then I would argue that it is the job of the MSA West worker and the MSA worker to study these legacies. And if you can't read a book, at least watch a documentary. There are plenty of documentaries out there. I encourage you to study and read for yourself because it's inspiring to especially read autobiographies of people who were involved at this time. Just some information that I wanted to share. SNCC was actually started in 1960 by someone named Ella Baker, and this was because a series of meetings that were held by students, young students like yourselves, at Shaw University. And even though it was started in the South, it spread all over America, and they have institutions all over America. They held sit-ins. What is a sit-in? You guys know what a sit-in is? Okay, good. It's not just protesting in terms of holding up signs. It's actually the areas where there was segregation, whether it be hospitals, whether it be libraries, whether it be lunch counters, deliberately sitting in the areas that they were told they were not allowed to sit in. Freedom rights. How many of you guys know what freedom rights are? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Freedom rights, another controversial thing to do, an act of I wouldn't necessarily even call it civil disobedience because they found the loopholes in the law which would allow them to do things that people were uncomfortable with. And I think that that's kind of the example that I think the UCI 11 took. But what they would do is local areas would not allow, would have segregated transportation. So they would take national transits into these local areas deliberately because they were able to somehow bypass the local law and culture and then be able to expose the people of that place to integration. In 1963, the March on Washington, Mississippi's Freedom Summer, these are all events that we should try to get to know more about. But they say that what was their biggest contribution was actually field work. So I want us to think about this. The biggest contribution was not the big events. The biggest contribution was their on-the-ground work with the people, and specifically their voter registration drives. So getting people who were otherwise disenfranchised to get them involved in the voting and political process. There's more to say about this, but I want to continue. I want to say there's two values that I thought were amazing about them. Later on, Stokely Carmichael got involved with them, and also they focused on both Black Power as well as they joined the anti-war movement, being against what was going on in Vietnam. They had a principle that they called participatory democracy. And what that basically meant was that instead of voting on an issue, majority rules, they believed in trying to bring about a consensus. Okay, so they would make shura, the Islamic concept of shura, consensus, was something that they practiced. And they said they were unique in this as a student organization, as a civil rights organization. Most other civil rights organizations were top-down in their approach. But SNCC was actually bottom-up. And this is something that we have to think about in terms of MSA West. Are we top-down, or are we embodying our own values that are being practiced, by civil rights organizations, which is consensus, building shura? Thinking of moving on to other organizations, I'm not going to go into depth about their histories, but I want to say this. When you look at Nation of Islam, or you look at the Black Panthers, one of the things that I was astounded with when I did a quick search even on the social programs is that it wasn't just political protests that they were involved in, but they were heavily involved in serving people, serving underprivileged people. That was a big part of their platform. When I looked up the programs institutions that were built by the Black Panthers, 65, not just events, 65 institutions to serve people. They had a free breakfast program. They had community food pantries. They had health clinics. And, again, these are organizations that were primarily run by young people. We're talking about people in their 20s. You look at the Nation of Islam. Even to this day, the Nation of Islam is involved in building clinics and providing services. So you can differ about an organization's approach or philosophy, but one thing we can't deny is how much they did to help serve poor and underprivileged people. Now, the social issue is huge, and it's something that I think our community has neglected. And again, when you look at the worldwide or global Islamic movements, wherever they are, you do find a lot of social programs. And what really hurts me is when I find someone who lived and experienced a Muslim movement that was heavily involved in social movements, things that got rid of prostitution and gave employment, building trade schools, feeding the hungry in Ramadan. They were involved in all of these social institutions in the Muslim world. Then they come over to America and they forget that element of Islam even exists. You become completely isolated in the masjid. Completely, you're just focused on your Quran halaqas, focused on the religious programming. And you came out of a history and a legacy of people that helped the poor, that helped those who were in need in different ways. And so what I'm proposing to MSA West is to go back to your own founding vision. For the students, study your own vision. And it's not so that you can become sectarian or whatnot. It's to go back to the universal values that created MSA West to begin with. Just to mention some of the basics of MSA West history, when I got involved, I found out that it was fiqh balanced, which meant that it didn't necessarily take a position on fiqh issues, and it embraced, the spectrum of fiqh opinions that exist out there. They also said that they were gender balanced. They wanted to have not only the inclusion of sisters, but equal inclusion of sisters. They were non-sectarian, we mentioned that. And in terms of political issues, they tended to look at things a little bit differently than the rest of the Muslim community did. So the older institutions, for example, if there was, a terrorist threat or bombing in America, the way that older institutions would respond, of course, would be to condemn these bombings. MSA West would condemn these terrorist acts at home, and in the same press release, condemn terrorist acts done around the world. So this is a difference. This is a difference in approach, meaning, yes, we're absolutely against the killing of innocent people, but we're against that wherever it happens and whoever is blameworthy for that. And this is an important approach to take, and sometimes the other institutions didn't necessarily have the courage or the willpower to put this out as part of their press release, but the students did. And it's an important example. And I remember when these press releases would come out, members of the older generation of the community having their morale lifted, being proud, being inspired, feeling that the students have the right to lead the community because of the fact that they were able to take these positions on a public level. The other thing that MSA West was associated with is looking into the subcultures within America that heavily associate with being socially conscious rather than trying to fit into the dominant paradigm. Okay? We're not trying to get white people to like us. It's not the approach of MSA West. We're not trying to not upset white people. Okay? And I say this, and I don't want to, it's not, my husband is white, so this is not supposed to be racially, it's referring to that concept of privilege. What is the highest level of privilege in America? A side note, I jokingly used to tell my husband that he became Muslim because he wanted to be oppressed. Because as a white person, he just couldn't fit into the oppressed crowd unless he became Muslim. But it's a joke. We had the Imam Jamil committee. When Imam Jamil was imprisoned, we didn't back away from him like many of our leaders are ignored today. There are political prisoners in America that did not do the crimes that they are accused of. And it was the students who stood up for him. And specifically, subhanAllah, his wife said that Imam Jamil had a special love for the students in California because of what they did for him. And he's all the way in the East Coast. He was all the way in the South in Georgia. And it was students from California that made his documentary, that flew around the country and showed his documentary and asked people to support him, asking people to write letters to him to make sure that he knows that he is still beloved to us and a figure that we have not forgotten. I mean, again, these are things that were not being done or focused on in masajid or greater institutions, but the students had the courage to address these things. There was the Free Iraq Foundation, and I think about the story of the students who were sent to Iraq, and there's a lot of interesting experiences that they had. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brother Muhammad Martaban. He was part of that crowd that went, and he was actually the MSA West president when I was served with him on the board. And 11 students, college students, flew to Iraq. They collected the funds, the money themselves. They flew to Iraq at a time of war, and they gave out charity to the poor people there under heavy government scrutiny. Saddam was still in power then. And at some point, one of the guards had actually told them that we've been spying on you the whole time, but since you guys act so silly, we don't consider you to really be a threat. Which is kind of a sad thing to say, but the hallmarks that I remember from MSA West history that the students were involved in, and again, these are things that I think we have to think about again. The two most active departments before they divided the region, the MSA West into regions, it was all the committees were centralized, which means there was a education department, and students from all over California would get on one conference call and talk about what is it that the students need on a tarbiyah level, on a developmental level, on a Islamic education level. What they found, for example, was when they did a survey, a lot of the students have trouble praying. At the Davis MSA West conference, a survey done at one of the workshops there. So they developed a prayer seminar. So again, responding to the reality that the students are facing and providing services for that. They also had the Political Action Committee, and again, this dealt with different political issues, whether they be domestic or abroad. I remember the hijab ban happened in France, and there were rallies that were organized around California. But the main thing is that it made people travel. Students in California would go from the Bay Area to San Diego for a single event, get in a van and come down. And in that meeting of people physically, although it was difficult, although sisters had problem getting permission from their parents and whatnot, the energy that was sparked from that was matchless. Seeing students from Berkeley while you're in San Diego come to your campus for an event there, you going somewhere else, 5 hours driving for a cause. This was something that made us feel like we can actually do something, that together we can have an impact. And subhanAllah, the impact was there. We were getting emails and messages from MSAs all around America saying, how do we affiliate ourselves with MSA West? Right? We don't live in California, but we want to be part of MSA West. We like the way you work. So my encouragement to all of these young students here, my time is almost up, is to think about bringing back that legacy, going back to the founding vision, and developing an understanding of your work based on that founding vision. You're going to have to sit down and watch these documentaries, maybe form halaqas, put together a curriculum, study your history so you can know how to take advantage of the future. Don't try to copy what we did. Set up your own future, make shura, talk to us or the older people that were involved, talk to the religious leaders, but understand this. When you're talking to religious leaders, there's a difference between someone who was a campus activist and experienced that and the person who isn't. So sometimes the advice you get from one sheikh who doesn't come from your experience as a campus activist is not going to be the best advice for your context because they just haven't been there themselves. There are other sheikh who have been MSA presidents and whatnot, and so they understand. Realize that and chart your own future. Don't do annual programs for the sake of doing annual programs. Create a vision of change that can lead the entire community. So I'm telling you, these other macro Muslim organizations, there's so much bureaucracy. There's so much red tape to get things done. I always have had the most hope in the students because you're the least shackled, you're the least indoctrinated, and you're the most open-minded usually. So I say this, and I encourage you all to continue the legacy of MSA West and to revive the legacies of both the Islamic movements worldwide and the civil rights movement. And whatever I said is beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is wrong and mistaken is from myself and the shaitan. Jazakumullah khair.